Hello, we're going to take a look at Chapter 10, and this is our first chapter for elementary school children. And I wanted to point out that in your textbook it calls this age middle childhood, and sometimes students confuse that with middle school. And we're not really talking about a middle school, we're talking about elementary school children. So I wanted to remind you about that. And this first section, we're focusing on physical development and sports. This is information that you'll need for quiz number 3 and assignment number 3. And so this won't be on quiz number 2. So then, thinking about a preschooler versus elementary school, what are the differences between a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old? And you can see in this picture that there are big differences between the two just by looking at appearance. And so between ages 6 and 11, physical growth slows down and then it's steady and it continues. Typical children grow 2 inches each year and gain about 7.5 pounds. Of course, this rate of growth depends on their genetic background, their race, their nutrition level, and then if they are afflicted with any kinds of diseases. There is a secular trend in physical growth. Each successive generation over the past 150 years is taller than the previous one, and this is mainly in industrialized countries. And this is likely due to improved health and nutrition. So when we look at the brain during elementary school, we notice that there's more specialization in the different areas of the brain. And this is the process by which neural structures become dedicated to performing particular tasks, and they gradually lose their plasticity to perform more than one task at a time. Integration is the process by which the brain areas communicate with other brain areas. So there's specialization happening and integration. And so here's an example of the difference between a child's brain and an adult's brain in regards to a facial recognition task. And you can see for adults, smaller areas of the brain are involved in that task when compared to a child's brain. And so when it comes to elementary school children's physical development, dynamic systems theory emphasizes that changes during that age focus on movement capacities, brain maturation, and then their motivation to practice their physical skills and their opportunities to do that. So here we're looking at graphs that focus on different motor skills between the ages of 6 to 18. And you can see that the blue line is for boys and the red line is for girls. And you can see that on the vertical aspect of this graph, you can see it's talking about centimeters, and on the horizontal it's talking about age in years starting at 4, although most of the graphs actually start at about 5 and then going up to 18 years. And so in this first one it focuses on flexibility and flexibility of the lower back, hips, and upper thighs between the ages of 5 and 18. And you can see that girls actually are more flexible than boys all the way across. And in fact, as they get older, there's a bigger difference in flexibility. And actually, when boys start puberty around age 12, they actually, and before they start puberty, their flexibility goes down but then improves as they get older and further along in the puberty process. And so here, when we compare running, we can see that they're looking at running time in seconds. And so you can see that boys and girls are pretty comparable from age 5 to 18. There's not a huge difference between the two, although boys tend to be a little bit faster between the ages of 14 to 18 than girls. In agility, here they're looking at a shuttle run and running times, and you see the same kind of pattern there. And now we're looking at jumping abilities and vertical jumps, and again on the left it's centimeters. And you can see between the ages of about 5 and 10, pretty comparable abilities, but then boys tend to surpass girls in their ability in the vertical jump, and there tends to be a wider difference starting at age 14 and a very large difference by 18. So here we're looking at the standing long jump, and we have a similar pattern than we saw in the previous jumping graph. So with throwing, and throwing is measured, this is ball throw for distance and measured in meters, and you can see there's a difference beginning from the very beginning, but then a bigger difference begins at about 13 between boys and girls, and boys are more skilled in the beginning, and then about 13 they become much more skilled. And so when we look at organized sports during elementary school, participation in organized sports is associated with positive outcomes, and children are most active in middle childhood when it comes to moving about and participating in organized sports. But there tend to be many individual differences in their level of physical activity and their skills. And so why do children want to participate in sports? Well, they do it because they think it's fun. They like to learn new skills. They like to challenge and test their own abilities. It's exciting, and they feel a sense of personal accomplishment. And so what about specializing in one particular sport versus participating in a variety of sports? Well, we have two different sides of the argument. The argument for specializing is that it usually takes 10 years to be really specialized in a particular sport. And it will take a lot of practice to become very skilled in that specialization. But for some sports, this is really required. You have to really specialize in order to participate and be skilled in that area. And then on the other side, arguments for diversifying is that you have more consistent performance levels if you're diversifying, and it stays interesting for longer periods of time. The children have fewer injuries because you're not repeating the same kinds of skills over and over. And then they tend to maintain a longer standing interest in physical activity. They don't get bored, whereas with specializations they might be bored with doing the same things over and over and over. So now let's take a look at vision and hearing difficulties in elementary school. So myopia is a common change that happens in elementary school, and myopia is nearsightedness, so it's easier for them to see close up than far away, and this tends to be caused by genetic factors or heredity and then the environment. And hearing problems are less common at this age than vision problems. A health issue that tends to show up in elementary school is asthma, and this is a respiratory condition that causes difficulty breathing. And again, there are genetic predispositions for this, but it can also result from environmental exposure. And because of where individuals might live, it's more common in low-income families and racial minority families. They may tend to live in areas where the rent or the house is cheaper, and the environmental conditions may not be desirable in those areas. And it's also closely related to indoor air quality, not just outdoor air quality. And then sleep in regards to health issues. 9 to 11 hours of sleep is recommended per night for elementary school children. If they're not getting enough sleep or their sleep is poor quality sleep, that results in poor cognition abilities and can result in obesity issues. So the older children tend to get substantially less sleep than younger children, and all age groups showed a wide range of sleep periods. So in this bar graph, we can see that second grade is red, fourth grade is orangish, and sixth grade is the blue. And then we can see percentage of children on the left and sleep period in hours. And we can see that by far the tallest graph is 8.5 to 9 hours. And you can see that fourth graders tend to get that amount of sleep more than any other age group. When we look at second graders, they tend to get 9 to 9.5 hours of sleep, but then also they might even go up to 10 hours of sleep. And then sixth graders, if we look at for the blue, the largest blue part of the bar, we see that they tend to get 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep. And then the next largest is 8 to 8.5 hours of sleep. Okay, as we did with early childhood, let's take a look at death rates among children by causes, and these statistics come from 2011. And so this measures death per 100,000 children, and the red is 1 to 4-year-olds and the blue is 5 to 14-year-olds. And so you can see for 1 to 4-year-olds, the major cause of death is unintentional injuries. And then there's a big difference between the unintentional injuries and the next highest level for 1 to 4-year-olds, and that's birth defects. For the 5 to 14-year-olds, you can see that, again, unintentional injuries, it has the highest rate, but there is a substantial difference between 1 to 4-year-old unintentional injury deaths and the 5 to 14-year-olds. The second highest for 5 to 14-year-olds is cancer, and then the others are much lower. And so you can see that having higher cognitive abilities and physical skills can make a difference in those unintentional injuries. And then another health issue is the quality of nutrition, and eating too much, having lower nutrition, but eating way too many calories, fats, and sugar and salt. Overweight. Children are in elementary school are more and more overweight, and this is having a BMI in the 85th to the 95th percentile. And then obesity, this is even higher than, this is above the 95th percentile in BMI. And causes for this are genetic factors and environmental. People are consuming more high-calorie foods. People are becoming more sedentary. We're doing more activities where we're sitting for long periods of time. Or we live in an area where it's not really safe to go outside and be more physically active. And these risk factors tend to cluster together. So some of the consequences of obesity is chronic diseases. And type 2 diabetes used to be strictly an adult disease, but now it's moving down into elementary school children. If you're obese as an elementary school child, you're more likely to be obese as an adult. And this can cause an elementary school child to be excluded and teased by their peers. And as a result, they may have low self-esteem and poor body image. And so prevention and treatment is needed at all levels of children's ecosystems in order to deal with this. And it's more about the adults and what kind of environment they provide and the kinds of food and physical activities they provide. So adults need to take more responsibility in this area.